Doctor Who Doctor by Doctor. Top 10 7th Doctor Stories plus Era Overview. Hello and welcome to the first of a new series in which I explore my favorite stories from each Doctor and give my own personal look at the era in general. This week we're going to start with the 7th Doctor, as played by the inimitable Sylvester McCoy. The Sylvester McCoy era ran from 1987 to 1989, and took place in a tumultuous period for the series. The show had fallen from grace in the mid-80s by virtue of a very public spat between the production team and BBC management after the latter had sneakily tried to can the show along with a bunch of others as a way to pay for breakfast TV, only for producer John Nathan Turner to organize a media backlash and essentially make that prize prick Michael Grade look like the talentless Thatcherite tosser he always was. The good news is the BBC relented on the axing, but the bad is they deeply resented it and essentially publicly attacked the production team and their own show, slashing the budget, slashing the episode count per year, firing the lead actor for no fucking good reason whatsoever other than being first-class prize cunts. And then, after promising JNT he could finally do another show and let someone else have a go at Who, dragging him back at the last moment to produce another season with less than half the usual production time. What a bunch of assholes, eh lads? The McCoy era never had a chance, with the BBC not just disinterested but actively hostile to the programme, a hostility that had since trickled down to the media as well. Yet something unexpected happened in the wake of all this mean-spirited politicking and backstabbing. JNT hired Sylvester McCoy to be his new Doctor, and young Andrew Cartmel to be his new script editor, and despite the ginormous rush to get season 24 made and on air, seemed to actually get a whole new spring in his step from his new team. The BBC finally got their way and axed the show in 1989, but far from going out as a shadow of its former self, they made themselves forever look like more clueless pricks than ever, as the classic show's final era proved to be one of its most creative, ambitious, entertaining and just plain fucking awesome. I became a fan between seasons at Christmas 1986, and the McCoy era was the first I watched live as a proper young fan, and it remains one of my absolute favorite periods of the show. Sadly, not counting his cameo in the 1996 US TV movie, the 7th Doctor has just 12 stories to choose from, but I'm still going to give him the full top 10 treatment anyway. Because he's worth it. 10. Silver Nemesis. Season 25 is a pretty great season, but Silver Nemesis is definitely the least lovely of the bunch. That being said, I certainly don't hate it like some, and would much rather watch this than any new series Cybersman story. That's for darn tootin' certain. Silver Nemesis has Sylve and the lovely Sophie Aldred as Ace, the defining companion of the era and of the 1980s, on fine form. The good old 80s Cybermen, excellent, and plenty of action and fun. A bit on the dumb side to be sure, but pretty watchable nonetheless. 9. Delta and the Bannermen. As noted, season 24 was a bit of a rush job, with cast and crew running on the spot just trying to get the show made, let alone really give much consideration to what they wanted the new era to be like. And yet, Delta and the Bannermen, a bizarre tongue-in-cheek 50s musical with aliens, more than demonstrates that the McCoy era is going to be a wildly radical departure from any period of the show made before. It may not hold together as well as most stories from the subsequent seasons, and is extremely lightweight, yet it's breezy, entertaining and silly fun with Sylvester on wonderfully charming form, and even Bonnie Langford, not likely to go down in history as one of the greater companions, seems relaxed, naturalistic and likable here. She even gets a genuinely great scene staring down a gun-toting Gavrok while trying to bluff him that the woman he's hunting has already been killed. Delta is a lot of fun. 8. The Happiness Patrol. Controversial then and even now to a somewhat lesser degree, the Happiness Patrol is a bizarre dark fairy tale on a nightmare world where being happy is mandatory by law, and being sad is punishable by death. Patrol has been touted as everything from a satire of the then Tory government to a gay rights polemic, and yet could also be seen today as a satire of the PCSJW crowd throwing their double talk down everyone's throats and woe betide you if you don't obey. And that's simply because Patrol is about fascism of all and any kinds, and mercilessly mocks the kind of arrogant cunts who think they know best for everybody. It's also very entertaining, with a great TARDIS team and a completely loony monster. 7. The greatest show in the galaxy. The finale to season 25, though it was initially intended to be shown second, but they mucked around with the transmission dates and ended up putting it out last in order to make Silver Nemesis still go out on the 25th anniversary, which is why Ace here picks up a medallion that she puts on her jacket that you can see in the two preceding stories. Haha. A dark satire on the television industry, and even sticking a righteous two fingers up at the less than flattering side of fandom itself. Greatest Show is a masterpiece of the surreal, the fantastic and the macabre. 6. Battlefield. Battlefield is woefully, and I mean woefully, fucking underrated, actually even downright hated in some fan circles, though fuck alone knows why. Yes, it's a bit cheap and rough around the edges, though no more than 95% of who, let's face it, and above all it's a right load of great fun. It's Doctor Who does sword and sorcery and Arthurian mythology, and it does it with great entertainment value. Jean Marsh is tops as the villainous sorceress Morgan, and Nicholas Courtney comes back for one last appearance in TV Doctor Who as the Brigadier, as cool, dry and brilliantly unflappable as ever. The Destroyer is one of the greatest monsters ever seen on Doctor Who or television. 5. Dragonfire. The climax to season 24, which ditches Bonnie Langford and introduces the magnificent Ace, is pretty underrated these days, but I find myself loving it more every time I see it. It's as witty as hell, really funny at times, but with a wonderfully and literally icy villain in Edward Peel as Kane, some superior model work and fantastic music from Dominic Glynn, who along with Mark Ayres contributes some of the best music scores ever heard in the series during this era. This one is just a hoot. 4. The Curse of Fenric. I missed the Curse of Fenric on transmission. I was actually on holiday in Osceolan for a month on a sort of recce, and yes, we did end up moving there a few years later. However, I was able to get a Who fan friend to tape me the whole story, and he gave me the tape back on the Wednesday which saw the airing of Survival Part 1. Interestingly, when I got back from holiday I found other classmates, people who would normally have told me how much they hated Doctor Who, cunts that they were, all telling me how awesome Doctor Who had been the last few weeks. I watched Survival Part 1 first, which I loved, and then slammed in Fenric and watched the whole thing in one go. I was completely blown away by it. Although the McCoy had been moving into horror territory, this was arguably its first full-on horror story with blood-sucking vampires a go-go, and indeed the first such story for many a year, and it was fucking amazing. Fenric remains a bona fide horror classic, and the climactic confrontation with Fenric may well be Sylvester's defining moment as the Doctor. 3. Remembrance of the Daleks. Well, I've reviewed the next 3 stories just recently in my top 30 stories ever video, and indeed given Remembrance its own full-length review in my story-by-story series, so I won't bore you too much by going over old ground. Remembrance is the best Dalek story of all time. Nuff said. 2. Ghostlight. A story hated on for being too clever by complete thickos, Ghostlight is a gothic Victorian masterpiece that just gets better and better every single time you watch it. 1. Survival. My favorite story of the era, and one of my top 10 of all time. Survival was the last story of the era, and of the original series, and while it's scandalous that the show was canned after a story and indeed season of this quality, let's thank the heavens it went out with its head held so high. Survival is a beautiful slice of science fiction mixed with urban fantasy and a truly magical piece of television. I love the Sylvester McCoy era. I love the 7th Doctor himself. A wonderfully iconic figure to me. In fact, the most iconic along with the first 4 Doctors. I love Ace. I love the stories and I love the overall atmosphere of invention, creativity and boldness that the era offers in spades, while retaining the essential components of the classic series that I also love so much. It's a shame it lasted such a short time, but they say that the light that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and this era burned so very brightly. I can give the Sylvester McCoy era nothing less than a straight A.